There are a number of factors, such as economy and social issues, leading to immigration around the world, and among one of these factors is politics. One international political event that has impacted people to immigrate to America is the Cold War, especially during the 1970s and the early 1980s. The Cold War situation was harsh in different parts of the globe, including Asia. There were proxy wars throughout the region, such as the Korean War, and Southeast Asia in particular. There was also the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, therefore, impacted the region in many ways, including immigration from such countries as Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam to the US at the end of the war. As a result, the presentation is going to explore these immigrants from three different Southeast Asian nations, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, in their historical, cultural, and social perspectives. First, we are going to look at the Laotian immigrants in America, in their history, demographics, community, culture, and social issues, representation in media, and also notable people of the group. History and background. According to an article published on Los Angeles Times, the Laotians immigrated to the US after the Vietnam War had ended. That is to say, the group's history of immigration to America cannot be separated from both its internal and international politics. The Laotian Civil War and the Vietnam War, in which the US military intervened directly. The Laotian Civil War was a civil war between two major political groups in Laos. First, the Communist Pathet Lao, led by Prince Suparnowong and other communist leaders, and the Royal Lao government, led by Prince Suphantarangsi and other nationalist leaders from 1959 to 1975. During the war, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, also operated their secret mission to train local soldiers, especially the Hmong and the Mien, which are ethnic groups living in today's Laos, to fight for the Royal Lao Army. Therefore, when the war had ended with the victory of the Pathet Lao government, there would be those Laotian soldiers, civilians, high-ranking government officials, and right-wing supporters who were fearful for their lives being threatened by the communist government. They fled and crossed the borders to refuge in many nearby countries, including Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, or even China. However, there were also those Laotians who would later resettle in America. From the mid-1970s to the early 1980s as the beginning of the Laotian immigration in the US. Demographics. According to American Factfinder, as of 2015, more than 95 Laotian Americans live in the West and more than 44,000 others live in the South, while there are approximately 37,000 live in the Midwest and 15,000 in the northeastern part of America. They live in the following states: California, Minnesota, and Washington, with 0.2% of the overall population, Texas, Colorado, Illinois, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia, as well as Oregon, with around 0.1% of the population, and Florida, with only around 0.05% of the overall population. Moreover, a study done by Mark E. Pfeiffer in 2017 suggests that most Laotians live in the following states or areas: Fresno, with more than 0.9% of the overall population; San Joaquin County, with 0.6% of the overall population; and Charage, with 0.5% of the population, Seattle and Sacramento with 0.4% of the population, Minneapolis, Portland, and San Diego with 0.3% of the overall population, San Francisco Bay and Rhode Island with 0.2% of the population, and Chicago with only 0.05% of the overall population. Laotian American communities, therefore, are found across the U.S. For example, there are those in St. Petersburg, in Florida, Habersham County in Georgia, and Houston in Texas. Also, there are those in Denver in Colorado, Storm Lake in Iowa, and Wichita in Kansas. Besides, there is one of the biggest Hmong, which is an ethnic group lives in today Laos, communities in Merced and Tulare County in California. Furthermore, in the northeastern part of the U.S., Laotian communities are widespread in the New England states, including Rhode Island, Lowell, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Ventura County Star also points out that since the 1980s, after the communists had taken over their homeland, most Laotian Americans have settled down in California and worked there as farmers. Community, cultures, and social issues. As they have resided in America, they developed their own cultures, mostly related to Buddhism. However, it is important to note that their religion is Theravada Buddhism, which is often mixed with animism or any pre-Buddhist beliefs. They have constructed a number of Buddhist temples, or Wat, across the U.S. For example, Wat Lao Puttaram is in California, along with Wat Lao Puttamanakaram in Ohio and Wat Lao Lan Chang in Connecticut. There are also Laotian temples in rural areas such as the area between Lafayette and New Iberia. There are also yearly festivals such as Sabai Di Face, which is the annual music festival with Thai and Lao artist performances, and the International Lao New Year Festival in San Francisco, California. They also celebrate Songkran there. Concerning social issues, Laotian communities in the U.S. are affected by the following problems: poverty, low per capita income, a lack of education, and also political rights. Firstly, according to National Archives in 2013, approximately 20% of Laotian Americans are under the poverty line. Secondly, as of 2014, American Community Survey has suggested that the Laotian Americans have had not more than $22,000 per capita in terms of income, lower than the American average, which is around $25,000. Thirdly, in 2009, the New York Times reported that hundreds of people, mostly Laotian Americans, gathered in Sacramento and protested the American government to release those who face federal charges of plotting to overthrow the Laotian government against General Wang Pao. Lastly, in 2013, data collected by the American government pointed out that around 40% of Laotian Americans dropped out of high school. Representation in media. Laotian Americans are represented in a magazine, movies, television series, and even a book or a novel. First, Lao Roots magazine, published in 2007, is the first Laotian American magazine. It published its content in English to promote the younger Laotian American generation. Despite the magazine's popularity among Laotian American communities, its publication was ceased. After that, the magazine's publishing team has collaborated with a Laotian American scholar from Yale University to establish an online magazine called LaoAmericans.com as the new platform to promote stories regarding those who are descended from Laos. Second, The documentary The Betrayal or Nerakun, directed by Ellen Kiras and Tawisuk Prasawat, represents a story of Laotian family that was forced to leave their homeland following the U.S. secret warfare in the wake of the Vietnam War. This film was also nominated for the Academy Awards or Oscar for the Best Documentary category. Also, in terms of TV series, Laotian Americans are featured in two series: The King of the Hill, which is an animation, and the sixth season of CSI or Crime Scene Investigation. In King of the Hill, the Supanusin family is Laotian American. In the second episode, Room Service of CSI Season 6, a Laotian American murderer is featured in. Also, Jamie Wyatt's painting, Kaluna in Frogtown. The subject of the painting is Laotian American. Notable people. Laotian American communities have created a number of great sportsmen in various fields, including badminton, bodybuilding, football, and also swimming. Kan Malaitong is the first Laotian American to become the U.S. representative in a badminton team in the 2008 Summer Olympics. Phutapon Ko Chandetka, a national bodybuilder, is also of Laotian descent. As of 2016, he won the 7th place in the Mr. Olympia contest for bodybuilding. Furthermore, there are a great number of Laotian American football players at the NCAA division level, including Scott Paidavong, Ramon Shelkiel Bowman, and Malachi Moore. In addition, Angelina Messina, a swimmer from Illinois, is mixed with Laotian descent. She participated in the 2020 IS Olympic trials. Justin Pingsawan is also bronze medalist at the 2020 Paralympic Games. Apart from sports, the Laotian-American community has also generated a number of notable people in America, including Chloe Dow, who is the winner of the second season of the reality show called Project Runway; Jujubee, who is a drag queen and TV personality; Tina Maharaj, who is an Ohio State Senator; and also Tawisuk Prasawat, Oscar-nominated and Emmy-winning director. Next, we are going to look at another group, the Cambodian immigrants in America, in their history, demographics, community, cultures and social issues, deportation and assimilation, which are big topics to be explored, and also notable people of this group. History and background. Apart from Laos, the Cold War has impacted another Southeast Asian nation, Cambodia. To trace back the history of Cambodian immigrants in America, it is essential to discuss Cambodia's internal political affairs in the 1970s. In the wake of the Cold War, it was the conflict between the Kingdom of Cambodia, which is clearly supported by the US, and the Khmer Rouge or Khmer Dang, which is supported by communist countries such as China, Soviet, and North Korea. The controversy became so intensified that there were the capture of Phnom Penh, which is the capital of Cambodia, and the massacre, which is very bloody. The massacre is called the Cambodian Genocide, and the political chaos. This led to the biggest waves of Cambodian immigration to the US from 1975 to 1994 because of their fear of the communist government. Demographics. A great number of Cambodian Americans live in California, with more than 86,000 of them, Massachusetts with approximately 25,000 of them living there, Minnesota with around 8,000 of them, Texas and Rhode Island with more than 5,000 of them, and Pennsylvania and Washington with almost 20,000 of them, according to the U.S. Census as of 2011. In California, especially in the southern part, a significant number of Cambodians live in Cambodia Town in Long Beach. This is the town with most Cambodian population outside of Cambodia, and also a smaller number of them in Los Angeles and San Diego. Apart from Southern California, in the northern parts, such as Stockton, Modesto, San Jose, Santa Rosa, Sacramento, and Oakland, there is also a major number of Cambodian populations as well. Moreover, in the Pacific Northwest, such cities as Tacoma are home to a large number of Cambodians. In the East Coast, Lowell, Massachusetts is the city with the second highest population of Cambodian Americans, next to California. They have settled since the 1980s and have small businesses there. Furthermore, in the nearby area, Lynn, Massachusetts, is the area with the third largest Cambodian population in America. In the south, more than 1,500 Cambodian Americans live in Jacksonville, Florida. Besides, there are more than 1,100 Cambodian Americans living in Spartanburg County, South Carolina. Moreover, there are Cambodian communities in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Biras, Louisiana, where they are usually hired as fishermen. There are also several groups of them living in Marietta, Stone Mountain, and Riverdale in Georgia, where there is a Cambodian town, and the non-profit organization, the Cambodian American Association of Georgia, is also there. In the Midwest, thousands of Cambodian Americans are present along with other Southeast Asian populations, such as the Hmong, in Minneapolis-Saint Paul, Minnesota. Also, around more than 2,000 of them live in Denver, Colorado, plus around 1,600 of them live in Columbus, Ohio. Community, cultures, and issues. Prior to 2000, only a small number of Cambodian Americans existed in the US. However, there have been a significant increase after that, and due to the growing number of populations, they have established their own culture in America. In Long Beach, California, for example, there is the Homeland Cultural Center that teaches Khmer martial arts in Cambodia Town. Another place offering classes in Khmer martial arts or Samot is the Khmer Arts Academy. Khmer language is taught at the Mark Twain Neighborhood Library. Also, there are museums devoted to the history of Cambodian Americans. One is the Cambodian Cultural Museum and Killing Fields Memorial in Seattle. The museum was founded by Dara Duong, who is a survivor of the Cambodian genocide, and another museum, the National Cambodian Heritage Museum and Killing Fields Memorial in Chicago. Moreover, Cambodian Americans hold Theravada Buddhism as their main religious belief. As a result, they have established two temples, Phra Phuttarangsi Temple and Wat Khmer Palelai Monastery in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In terms of politics, according to National Asian American Survey, Cambodian Americans are politically active. For example, more than 60% of them voted for Barack Obama in 2012 election, and in 2016, approximately 80% of them voted for Hillary Clinton from the Democrats. However, Cambodian communities in America have faced several social issues, including poverty, education, low mental and physical health, political rights, and also deportation. Firstly, as of 2000, according to the US Census, approximately 53% of Cambodian Americans who are older than 25 did not pass a high school. The number is quite low compared to other populations in the US. Secondly, they have faced poverty. In 2000, they earned around $36,000, and later, in 2008, a study at New York University suggested that almost 30% of Cambodian Americans were under the poverty line. Moreover, in 2014, the largest community of Cambodian Americans in California was reported to have more than 32% of the poverty rate. Also, the Personnel Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, signed by President Bill Clinton in 1996, caused a lot of legal immigrants to lose their federal aid received from the Social Security Administration. As a result, Southeast Asian immigrants, including Cambodians, were largely affected. They have lived in poverty and could not access any state welfare or any service provided by the government. Thirdly, Cambodian American people face the problems concerning both mental and physical health, according to the advocates for human rights. More than 80% of Cambodian Americans were very likely to have affective disorder, leading to depression or anxiety. Plus, a study done by a group of researchers published in Journal of Immigrant and Minority Health suggests that those Cambodian Americans who live in Long Beach, California, were smokers. Most of them were male and smoked cigarettes often. Furthermore, concerning political issues, NBC suggested that in 2019, hundreds of Cambodian Americans rallied around Sacramento in California to protest against the deportation of Cambodian Americans. This leads us to another question. What is deportation and how is this important to Cambodian American politics? Well, deportation normally refers to the process of returning of someone, especially the convicted, to their home country. Therefore, deportation of Cambodian immigrants from the US is to return those Cambodians who committed crimes in America to Cambodia. The process is long and can be traced back in the late 1970s. Through the Indochina Migration and Refugee Assistance Act, Cambodians who fled from the Khmer Rouge were eligible for being American citizens in 1977. Once they had arrived in America, they were put to live in Lowell and Lynn in Massachusetts and in Long Beach, California. However, little did they receive continuous support from the government. After that, according to CNN, Bill Clinton's administration enforced the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996 to deal with illegal immigration and terrorism. As a result, in the early 2000s, those Cambodians who were not eligible for being American citizens and convicted of crimes were deported to their homeland. Since then, data from the federal government suggested that Cambodians were continuously deported with more than 90% of them in 2011 and the following year. Most of them were male in their 20s and 30s. One survey also suggested that they had lived in America for 20 years or more than 2 decades for average, since they were children who are brought by their parents who were refugees. As a result of the increasing number of deported Cambodians, Bill Harrod created the NGO called the Returnee Assistance Program, or their today's name, the Khmer Vulnerability Aid Organization, to help them return to Cambodia safely. But the Cambodians still did not receive official support. Moreover, the process of deportation has been continued and increased during Donald Trump's presidency, as this video will suggest you. issue of Cambodian Americans concerned assimilation. Most Cambodian Americans had migrated to the US with no or less formal education. They tended to face social issues such as incapability of communicating in English and less access to jobs. There is also the issue concerning their traumatic past, the Khmer Rouge genocide, which has impacted their mental health. As a result, it was difficult for them to assimilate to American educational system. In addition, those Cambodian Americans who were born in the US could not recognize their ancestors' history in Cambodia, and Cambodian history is rarely taught in America. This causes them to lose a sense of their original history. Notable people. Cambodian American communities have generated a great number of famous people in the US. For example, Francois Cho, who is an actor, Pante Thamawara, who is a monk who spreads Theravada Buddhism across the US, and there are also politicians including Elizabeth Heng and Wana Hobart. Especially, Angelina Jolie is granted with Cambodian citizenship since 2005, and this picture here shows her meeting Hun Sen, the leader of Cambodia.
The last group to be explored in today's presentation is the Vietnamese immigrants in the US. Another Southeast Asian group that was impacted by the Cold War to immigrate to the US was the Vietnamese, who would later become the fourth largest Asian American following the Chinese American, Filipino American, and Indian American, with more than 2 million of them living across America. Prior to the Vietnam War, only a small number of the Vietnamese lived in America. However, after the war had ended, they entered the US tremendously. That is to say, the Vietnam War is an important factor to consider when discussing the influx of Vietnamese American. As President Gerald R. Ford continued Richard Nixon's policy to fight in the Vietnam War by supporting the Viet Cong, the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, to counterattack the North Vietnamese until the fall of Saigon in 1975, the event that ended the Vietnam War. He saw importance in South Vietnamese human rights and thus gathered different groups of South Vietnamese, including Christian groups, and helped them refuge to the US along with other Cambodian, Laotian, and even Thai refugees. As Ford once said, to ignore the refugees in their hours of need would be to repudiate the values we cherish as a nation of immigrants. And I was not about to let Congress do that. Before the Vietnam War ended, most Vietnamese people living in America were wives and children of American scholars, or those who served the military. There were also students, diplomats, and military trainees. However, after the war, there would be those Vietnamese who came to America, both by air and by ships, in a large number, to serve as doctor and technical managers. Since they were well educated and financially stable and spoke English fluently, only a small numbers of them served as unskilled laborers, such as fishermen and farmers. Just before the fall of Saigon, President Nixon carried out Operation Baby Lift to evacuate a great number of South Vietnamese children to the US, as well as other Western nations, along with Operation New Life to let them have new lives. Many of them have become American citizens until today. They entered the U.S. as refugees as a result of President Gerald Ford and Congress enforcement of the Indochina Migration and Refugee Assistance Act in 1975, which allowed Southeast Asian, especially the Vietnamese, to refuge the U.S. especially. According to Rosley, they were allowed to live in different parts of the country to prevent ethnic enclaves. However, a majority of them would live in California and Texas. Once they had arrived in the US, they lived temporarily in American military camps, such as Edgecliff Air Force Base in Florida and Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. Later, they would settle by themselves with the support of wildlets. After the fourth Saigon, from the late 1970s to the mid-1980s, there was another major group of Vietnamese immigrating to America due to the Communist Party of Vietnam's unstable economic and political status, such as famines and concentration camps. During the time to escape these hardships, a number of South Vietnamese, especially the boat people, fled mainly by ships to other nearby countries. And there were those who helped by foreign ships, including Thailand, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and Philippines, and taken to asylum camps. Also, there are those who were helped by the US. Thanks to the Refugee Act of 1980 and the Orderly Department Program, or ODP, established by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, it was not difficult for Vietnamese immigrants to refuge in America. From the late 1970s to the early 1980s, there were around 280,000 Vietnamese refugees in America. In the early 1980s, Vietnamese immigrants became widespread across the US. They went wherever they were supported. Most of them live in California, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Florida. Since then, there have been more and more Vietnamese immigrants coming into America. There are according to Pew Research Center as of 2019, there have been more than 2 million Vietnamese living in America. Most of them reside in the western part of the country. The city with most Vietnamese Americans is San Jose, California, with more than 100,000, followed by Garden Gulch, California, with around 52,000. The third city with most of them living in is Houston, Texas, and then San Diego, California. There are also more than 10,000 of them living in other cities, such as Westminster, Santa Ana, Los Angeles, Anaheim, Philadelphia, Portland, and New York. That is to say, California is the major state of Vietnamese American. As they have arrived in the US, they have developed their own culture, as well as attempted to preserve their homeland's culture. For example, Vietnamese prioritize family variety and prefer an extended family in America. They usually live in nuclear families, but still maintaining their ties with other family members who could not live together. Also, their family relations are reflected on the special day, the anniversary of each ancestor's death. On this day, family members would gather, have meal together, and even tell a story about the dead one. Furthermore, on special occasions, the Vietnamese will wear their traditional costume to promote their culture. For instance, Tết Viễn Đàn, a long week holiday to remember their ancestor and celebrate their amity with relatives, friends, and teacher. On this day, traditional food, including square and round sticky rice cakes, are served. They also visit their ancestor graves on the day. Besides, there are parades such as the one in Portland, called the Portland Rose Festival Parade. Another special holiday for the Vietnamese in the US is Tết Trung Biển, the Day of Wandering Souls. On this day, the celebration is to prepare food, money, and clothes to worship the ancestral soul who are wandering around. Moreover, Tết Trung Thu is celebrated by them in the US. The day refers to Children's Day and is celebrated by having the children holding colorful lights and musical parades. In terms of religions, most of the Vietnamese are Buddhists, Mahayana Buddhists. However, there are also mixture of Taoism, Confucianism, and animism, along with ancestor worship. A small number of them also believe in Christianity and other religions. There are around 150 Vietnamese Buddhist temples in the US. Besides, there are famous Vietnamese American monks, including Thich Thien An and Thich Nhat Hanh, who continue to spread and teach Buddhism in America. In addition, there are Theravada Buddhist Vietnamese temples, such as Chùa Bu Mon in Texas. In terms of politics, Vietnamese Americans are politically active, and there is one event that can prove this, which is the high-tech incidents. The high-tech incidents is a series of protests of Vietnamese Americans in Littlesagan, California in 1999. The purpose of the protest is to respond or oppose to high-tech video that display the communist Vietnam flag and pictures of Ho Chi Minh in a video store. The events occurred largely because of the anti-communist sentiment in America, with some Americans acting violent and stereotyping Vietnamese as communist terrorists. Also, this is the biggest protest in Littlesagan. The protest lasts for more than a month, beginning in mid-January, when the flag and picture were first shown. After that, hundreds of people gather in front of a store and ask for the removal of the flag and a picture. Most of them are South Vietnamese. That is to say, they felt offended and could not stand communism. They were stereotyped by some American. In late February, the protests reached the peak with approximately 15,000 people protesting. The protests ended in mid-March, with the store being closed and its owner being sentenced. In the end, the incident has inspired many Vietnamese Americans to engage in politics. Moreover, in 2008, Manhattan Institute suggests that Vietnamese Americans are one of the most assimilated group in the America, and they see themselves as a permanent resident. So, they need to engage in American politics as much as possible and their rates of engagement in civic matters. Both major American political parties, the Democrats and Republicans, have been supported by Vietnamese Americans. For example, in 2008, National Asian American Survey suggests that more than 20% of them supported the Democratic Party, while around 30% supported the Republican Party. However, in the general elections of the same years, two-thirds of them vote for Republican candidate John McCain. That is to say, they have supported both parties. Republicans' party seems to attract more Vietnamese Americans than the Democratic Party, mainly because the Ronald Reagan administration that helped the first generations of the Vietnamese immigrants arrive in America. Recently, according to CNN, during the 2016 election, most Vietnamese Americans support Donald Trump, as well as in the latest election. Also, there are pro-Trump rallies established by Andy Ngo across the U.S. and the last year's Capitol attack. Vietnamese Americans were seen among Trump supporters. However, some of them, especially those who were younger, were disappointed with the Capitol riot. Besides, concerning the American-Vietnamese relations, those Vietnamese who reside in the U.S. often protest the government in Vietnam, especially on the topic concerning human rights and free speech. Concerning social issues, there are such issues as language barrier, employment, and criminal among those Vietnamese who live in America. First, the differences between Vietnamese and English cause problems in communication among them. For example, while second-person singular pronouns in Vietnamese vary by gender and social status, the ones in English do not. Second, early Vietnamese immigrants in America arrived with no money, so they had to work hard to live in the U.S. Most of them worked as industrial workers or worked in the small services, including cooks, mechanics, and repairmen. However, in later years, there seems to be an increase in their income and better livelihood. For example, they own small business such as Vietnamese restaurants, beauty salons, and supermarkets. Moreover, the newer generation of Vietnamese Americans are more well educated and usually become professional workers, working in such fields as engineering, fishing industry, and big business. Third, there are problems concerning criminal among Vietnamese Americans in California. As of 2018, there have been more than 20% of them being arrested, and in Virginia, there were the second highest arrest group after African American. Besides, an article published in the journal Law and Order written by Rob Crott in 2001 suggests that a number of Vietnamese Americans usually commit crime by invading others' homes. Regarding laws, there's one law in which the Vietnamese Americans are involved. The Vietnamese Fishermen's Association antitrust suit. The first generation of Vietnamese Americans throughout the 1970s and the 1980s were discriminated, especially among the fishermen. White fishermen said that the Vietnamese American fishermen caused an unfair competition for them. As a result, they did not allow any Vietnamese American boat to dock and even refused to buy shrimps from them. First, the Ku Klux Klan, the white supremacist group, attempted to threaten Vietnamese American fishermen and even tried to burn their ships. As a result, the Vietnamese Fishermen's Association, with the help of Southern Poverty Law Center, fought back to Ku Klux Klan and protect the Vietnamese American by winning the antitrust suit in 1981, which dissolved the private army of white supremacists. Most Vietnamese in the media are soldiers, especially those who participated in the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War is a theme that features in many films, including Platoon, 1986, Apocalypse Now, 1979, which is the adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Hearts of Darkness, and The Deer Hunter in 1978, which won 5 Oscars for the Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Best Film Editing, and the Best Sound. Moreover, during the Vietnam War, American journalists who visit Vietnam often focus more on the conflict between the two political sides and how the war was conducted, but not on the cultures or the way of life of people there. So, many Americans view Vietnamese as communists. However, as of the mid-1960s, despite optimist view presented by official media channels, most Americans thought that it might not be good for the U.S. to involve in the Vietnam War. There were also those who felt betrayed by their government for not being truthful about the war as well. As a result, public opinion towards the American involvement in the war was not positive, and public pressure to end the war increased. For example, a Washington-based analytic company, Gallup, had done a poll showing that only around 30% of Americans approved President Lyndon B. Johnson's direct involvement in the war, while approximately 60% disapproved. The Vietnamese American community has generated a number of well-known people across America and the world. For example, Katie, a singer, Jeannie Mai, television personality, Tyga, Vietnamese and Jamaican rapper, James Duval, an actor, and lastly, Kaylee Mary Trans, an actress in Star Wars, The Last Jedi and Raya, and The Last Dragon. In the end, each group presented today was largely impacted by the Cold War to immigrate to the U.S. They fled from their homeland to escape such a dangers as mass killing and to seek sanctuary in America. When they arrive, they have developed their own distinct cultures and way of life that form a special place for them in the U.S. For example, there might be some law targeting at them, or there might be some conflicts between them and the local Americans. However, all of the groups have indicated that America was and still the land where any ethnic or cultural groups can reside all together under the same flag. Thank you for your attention.